Cybersecurity does not exist for the sake of cybersecurity. We don't live in our own bubble. I'd say it was probably the worst year in the UK when it comes to cyber. Bad guys run businesses as well, and we're talking about pure return on investment. You can only fight fire with fire. You can fight machine with machine. We need to start getting better at understanding what those agents are doing. The one who sends their reinforcements everywhere will everywhere be weak. Putting, numbers relevant to vulnerabilities in front of boards doesn't really make much sense. We need to be smarter about those things.
Hey, Ivan Milankovic, you are VP Cyber Risk Technology at Qualys. Very happy to have you today with us on RISKINTEL Media. Tell me a little bit about you.
So first and foremost, very happy to be with you. Thank you for the invite. Right, something about me. Almost 20 years, if not a bit more, in the industry. Makes me feel a bit old. But I joined Qualys on the back of the fact that I actually used to practice many of the things that I'm sort of trying to pass on the message today. So I'm coming from a CISO background.
Okay.
And in my current role, I talk to CISOs and other important executives in the organizations about how to do cyber risk management properly.
You flew today from the UK, so I did my due diligence. I wanted to understand more of the cybersecurity ecosystem in the UK, and I found out that a lot of companies had cyber attacks recently that hit the UK economy very harshly. So I wanted to ask you what's going on?
It's a fantastic question, Yasmin. Yes, this year's been rather harsh. If I kind of reflect on it, it's properly summarized in a headline from the regular annual report, if you want, that's published by NCSC, our National Center for Cybersecurity. And basically the headline was, "It's time to act." So much has happened. I'd say it was probably the worst year in the UK when it comes to cyber, when it comes to how it hit the economy. We've seen some very big things, and I think it could be summarized effectively not as a failure when it comes to cyber, but as a failure when it comes to actually being able to understand the broader impact. So effectively, it was the failure of business impact planning. Yes, we could even put a theme around that one. I'll try to explain it in a slightly simpler language. Imagine modern cars. Every car these days, to pass very stringent safety tests, has crumple zones. So it's pure physics. When the energy hits an object, that object can deflect. It can, in a large capacity, absorb that impact, or it will shatter ultimately. So modern cars are made with these crumple zones that basically take the energy away from the occupants, from that survival cell in the middle. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges we've seen, simply because people didn't properly understand how far-fetching some of these incidents could be. People didn't necessarily understand that a cyber event can actually overspill into something that's, in a way, kinetic. When the factory floors stop, when shops close down, it's a huge impact. So that's where, in my opinion at least, the problem was. We just didn't understand, as I said, how far-fetching some of those things can be. And effectively, we did not understand the fact that risk is such a fluid thing. So it will flow downwards, it can go upwards as well. That's where the challenge is.
And do you think that in the light of the recent events, everyone understands now the cybersecurity field is understanding those connections that you're talking about?
They should indeed. I guess the message is out there. If the executive said, I mentioned the NCSC report where the headline is, "It's time to act,"
yes.
Where if you read it, everything is along the lines of cyber must be very high up on boards' agendas and so on. We actually have some reports that say that as it stands right now, cyber is the #1 risk when it comes to UK economy. then definitely people should start paying attention. And it's, I guess, to do with many things. On one side, imagine a scenario where you have business that does its own thing. Not all businesses have experts when it comes to cyber. That's where some of those problems are. That's where, again, across the industry, we need to see the movement. I guess before we started, we discussed about some of those things. If I look backwards in 2022, there was a very interesting incident that Toyota in Japan suffered. It was an incident where one of their suppliers got hit by ransomware, and that effectively, because of how the entire industry operates and their just-in-time model, that caused them to effectively cease production for a whole day across 14 factories. In 23, we had another very interesting incident in the UK. It was a mid-sized logistics company. So imagine a company that that hauls goods and stuff from one place to another. So, lorries and warehouses and that sort of stuff. And they experienced a cyber event, again, ransomware. Company went out of business. Again, I'm not going to unpack each and every incident we had this year in the UK, but there's definitely an underpinning theme that should tell every business leader there is something that they need to look at very seriously. And ultimately, we as security professionals need to be in a position to be able to explain to the businesses what and how needs doing. My big mantra is, something people definitely need to understand is cybersecurity does not exist for the sake of cybersecurity. We don't live in our own bubble. We exist for the sake of supporting the businesses we work for.
Well, I wanted to share with you a conversation that I had with cybersecurity experts recently. They brought to me something that is in the way the hackers are currently doing their attacks. So usually hackers that do ransomware tend to try to extort money. However, there is a little bit of a shift in their tendency. They want to disturb, they want to destruct, they don't want to especially extort money. So I wanted to know if it's something that you saw on the field, that you are experiencing.
Definitely. Thinking about it, bad guys run businesses as well, and we're talking about pure return on investment. Obviously, ransomware was and still is a big threat, but let's not forget the fact that businesses learn from it. Thankfully, everybody's getting better at doing proper backups, testing things, effectively removing big part of the problem when it comes to how ransomware used to effectively affect companies. So it's quite normal to see that shift. It's quite normal to see when, you can't effectively extract money from a company by encrypting their systems, you're going to try and do something else. So we see a different type of weaponization. We see, those cases where effectively they stop businesses, and ultimately that leads to, if production is down, if, again, in a recent case in the UK, if you consider the financial impact, and we're talking about something in a range of 50 million pounds a day, which is absolutely very huge amount, it's probably much, much easier to extract something out of it. So yes, bad guys are, capitalists.
Yeah. So one of the arguments that I had from the cyber expert that I talked with is that today companies are no longer paying the ransomware. They are not paying to have their data back because they know that they're not going to have them in the same way they were stolen. So do you think that it's linked because the hackers know that they are not going to be paid anyway, so they're here to destruct and they will sell those data on the dark web anyway?
Indeed. And as I said, they are going after the money on one side. On the other, we have a very interesting geopolitical situation worldwide. So we also need to recognize the fact that, some of those things could, I guess, easily be leveraged as almost preemptive strikes. I wouldn't like to go there too much, but funnily enough, again, that's the reality. Earlier this year, I went to Tallinn. There was the infamous CyCon, NATO cybersecurity conference there, and that was a big topic. How is effectively cyber used for some of the nasty activities if you want. So thinking about that, thinking about the fact that, again, as I mentioned, even NATO is kind of considering what and where the boundaries between cyber and kinetic are, and the fact that we have a very active theater of cyber war. Yes, those things are, quite, I guess, they're quite here, they're quite now, they're quite something that we need to pay attention to. So, thinking about whether that's just part of a shift to, is it easier to get money that way? Possibly. Or is it somewhere where actually nation states are getting in it to, up their game and to try and do more damage? Well, yes, probably as well. So I guess it's a perfect mix of those two bad things.
So let's talk about the cyber attacks that recently were on the news. Without naming names, we saw that it was big companies around the world that have different type of cyber attacks, like breaches, etc. When it comes to big companies, we know that they are aware of the risk in terms of cybersecurity. We know that they put the budget in their cybersecurity. So you mentioned that you were a CISO and now you are advising CISO. So for a CISO that needs to budget during the year, how can he prioritize the money where they can put it when they don't know exactly from where the attacks is going to come from?
I would like to partially challenge that what you said. I think we do know where the attacks come from.
Okay.
Attacks come from unmanaged or mismanaged risks. And it's a rather simple thing. Putting my old CISO hat on, again, let's use an analogy. You wouldn't put a 10,000 euro lock on a 1,000 euro bike to protect it. At the same time, you wouldn't put a 1,000 euro lock on a bank vault. And these days, in many environments, people tend to sort of apply that, same type of a lock everywhere. That just doesn't work. There's a very good old quote, Sun Tzu, I don't want to go all philosophical on you, but, one who sends their reinforcements everywhere will everywhere be weak. You can't fix it all. You can't really patch absolutely everything. So you need to focus on those things. And that means you need to start understanding the business. What are those things that actually mean a lot to the business? What are those things that if they went down, business might stop? That's the way to think about it. Because in that case, sometimes asking maybe for, £10,000 investment to do something, if you wrap it up around, we need to spend this money to patch a server, does that mean anything to the board? Does that mean anything to the execs? Not necessarily, it's almost just noise. But if we said, unless we patch this vulnerability, we're running a risk of, 5-10 days of downtime, and we might lose 200 or 500,000 euros. It's a very different discussion. So that's the way to do it. That's the way to focus people, obviously, on where the problems are. But ultimately, as I said, it boils down to us as security guys moving away from the department of no to a different type of no. I know what our risks are. I know where the problems are. I understand and I know our business drivers, and ultimately I know the architecture that's required to solve that. That's the way to do it.
So from what you are saying, that also means that some risks are acceptable depending on how much they can cost at the end.
Absolutely. Again, it's a business decision.
Yeah.
When I think about it, and that was always the case where our, biggest role as security professionals is to help businesses make those tough decisions. Again, why would someone invest 1,000 euros into a security solution versus put 1,000 euros into something to improve the production? That's what the business leaders are faced with. That's what we need to help them with. So, there's no other way to actually think about it.
I wanted to talk about Anthropic report. Maybe you heard about it. Yeah.
A very interesting one, yes.
So from this paper, they seem to say that you have Chinese cyber hacker that carried out a fully autonomous attack, which is, if it's true, one of the first in the kind. Well, a lot of people in cybersecurity weren't very convinced of it. So I wanted to have your input. Do you think it's true? What are your thoughts about it?
That was definitely a big one. I would even class it as a Sputnik type event that we experienced, and it's so interesting just thinking about it and reflecting on what was done. We know that there were some guardrails in place. We know obviously that the system by default wasn't supposed to do anything like that. But for me, the scariest part is not that some damage was done, but effectively the fact that a threat actor could coerce, convince the system to do a whole range of things, starting from reconnaissance, basically weighting the targets and figuring out what are those targets with the biggest value, creating the exploits, exfiltrating data. So it was effectively the entire kill chain. And then what makes it scary is that entire kill chain was executed not, within days or whatever. No, we're talking about minutes and hours, possibly. So what we have on our hands is effectively a cyber attack that happens at machine speed. Again, the challenge there is, if we keep responding at human speed to the attacks at machine speed, I think it's very evident where the problem is.
Well, this is my next question, because how do we do on our side, on the defense side? Do we have, for example, autonomous AI that can scan the system and tell you preemptively that there are vulnerabilities and those are going to be used?
Look, we do and we must. There is no other way to put that. When you consider, as I said, what's going on and the fact that we now have attacks at machine speed, you can only fight fire with fire. You can fight machine with machine. So we must turn to agentic AI for protection. At Qualys, for example, we recognize that our flagship platform supports agentic when it comes to helping people do certain things, validate where the problems are, look at proposing the right solutions to effectively address those problems that can affect the company in the worst possible way, as well as even, of course, if someone wants to do it right here, right now, completely automatically remediate most of it. So in a way, I'm not saying here that we have, a silver bullet solution for everything. What I'm saying is that people have a choice. And what I'm saying is that across the board, everybody should be thinking about the fact that there's so much stuff that needs doing. We need to be very smart about leveraging AI and agentic AI to remediating those things and to removing the noise that hurts us. Because, there are thousands of vulnerabilities and every environment will have huge amount of technical debt. It's just one of those things that in the past we sort of had to just live with. But again, as I said, we can get much better at it. We can be smarter about it. We can actually employ agentic to remove the noise. Just to leave you with an interesting stat, out of all the vulnerabilities that are known to us thus far, it's probably around 1% only that's actually effectively used and leveraged in attacks, and that's kind of properly, if you want, nasty when it comes to affecting companies. So if you have something that can pinpoint that stuff, that can really put the magnifying glass over that 1%, that can only be beneficial, no?
I do understand your point and I agree with you. However, some might say, do we really need to create something that might in the future go in the hands of the cyber criminal?
I'm not going to say might. I will say no, that already happened. We discussed the Anthropic incident.
Yes.
That's it. Effectively, if you can nudge AI to waltz around guardrails and do certain things, we are talking about something that happened. So, that's not new. But nonetheless, I think that brings us to another interesting point, how you go about that and what we can do to effectively protect ourselves. One could argue when we talk about good old-fashioned OSI networking model and the infamous 7 layers of it. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. But, typically layer 7 was the application layer. So we are talking about, things such as web traffic and database traffic and this and that. Relatively recently, people cheekily started adding human onto that model as a layer 8. What I'm going to suggest here is that we definitely have 7.5 on our hands, and that's agentic. That's something that almost sits between that application layer and the human layer. And we need to learn how to start addressing it. We need to learn how to start looking at those things and being able to anticipate and manage risks as well. If I sort of reflect on, good security solutions that we started having relatively recently, not necessarily, the last couple of days, but what was the thing over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we started getting into that user behavior analytics. I think that's definitely something that we'll have to start thinking harder about, because at the end of the day, if I try to translate human behavior into what we're seeing now, well, isn't that the same thing? We'll have agentic behavior. We need to start getting better at understanding what those agents are doing. We need to start understanding, again, just as an example, if you have agent in the middle of the night trying to process, a payment transaction of sorts where that shouldn't be happening, ultimately something's wrong at that semantics level. So this is the stuff we need to get on with. That's the stuff we need to start looking at the semantics. We need to start looking at how that changes our risk posture and how we're able to effectively protect from those things.
I also wanted to talk about the reporting of vulnerabilities. So you said something very interesting at the beginning of our interview. You said that to prioritize the budget for a CISO, you need to put the risk, and in front of the risk, you put in some ways the money, the cost of it. So when I saw that some cybersecurity experts did their reporting with vulnerabilities, I thought it was a little bit odd, because vulnerabilities are very technical KPIs and the board are usually more on the macro side. So do you think it's really relevant to go about doing KPIs with vulnerabilities for the board?
I would say that's a big no-no. Yes, some of us, as in security professionals, might be lucky enough to have good allies in boards and to have people that possibly understand some of those things. But putting, numbers relevant to vulnerabilities in front of boards doesn't really make much sense. Saying that you have, 1,000, 5,000, 100,000 unpatched vulnerabilities doesn't necessarily mean anything. We should be feeding those guys risk. Boards eat risk for breakfast. They're used to deal with all sorts of other risks, geopolitical stuff, financial risks, and so on and so forth. Cyber industry is coming late to the game, and we really need to become better at it. And let's not forget, money is the language of business. So unless we are actually able to translate that for them, we won't be seen as the right sort of partners around the table. It's quite easy to go back and kind of try to live in our own bubbles. But as I said at the beginning, cyber does not exist for the sake of cyber. We exist for the sake of supporting the businesses we work for and with. We got to do it.
By being too technical, do you think that cybersecurity experts fail in making cybersecurity a matter that everyone can understand?
Yes, and maybe it sounds brutal, maybe it sounds harsh, but again, I don't necessarily see it as something so bad that it cannot be remediated. I already mentioned, we came quite late to this party. And we need to learn, we need to reflect on, our mistakes and whatnot, and we need to change those conversations going forward. Everybody needs to understand that, of course, there is a huge technical component, and when we talk about all those, various threats and how they can manifest and where the problems are, and the fact that technology is effectively exploding. We live in very, very interesting times where you have something new almost on a daily basis. It's hard not to do it in that way. But again, that's the fine balance is, and we need to be able to do it because, again, at the end of the day, let's not forget about what businesses are doing. And let's not forget about the fact that although many of us, we are technologists at heart, but ultimately we need to be able to supply the people that, make those tough decisions the right information. That's our job.
What you said is very true. Technology is exploding and you have a multiplication of tools on the market. And one of the CISO that I was talking with told me that he had 45 different tools in cybersecurity. He was managing all of that. Isn't it a little bit hard to manage that many solutions at the same time?
Let me tell you something interesting. That guy is lucky. And I say that because there are studies that show that on average, we have in large enterprises on average 76 different tools and screens that people need to be looking at. So yes, it's madness. I would call it a shiny toy syndrome. And the industry doesn't help when I think about it, cyber industry that is, because every time we see a new problem, we tend to invent a tool for it. We tend to even invent an acronym relevant to it. So you deal with this soup of things, and just living in that sort of an ecosystem can be a huge problem. Imagine a poor security analyst that has to switch from a system to get the information, to try and put that in a context, to bring it together, to correlate different things. Yes, not a nice place to be. I'd say we definitely need to change. I'm not suggesting here that companies need to start ditching those security solutions. Don't get me wrong, sometimes there are very good reasons why you would have many of those solutions. Again, just as an example, and on the back of technology explosion that we were talking about, we now have every company will have a variety of environments. Some might still have a legacy stuff, on-premise things. Many will have huge estates in various clouds. Somehow you need to, manage all of that. Somehow you need to understand all of the stuff that's there. Yes, of course, I almost forgot. Many will have, operational technology as well. So we have, OT, we have IoT. Again, many consoles will probably for quite some time be our reality. What we mustn't do, however, is leave it like that. What we have to do is try and bring it together at the right level. And I'm not talking about what a few years back, probably all security experts would claim to be in nirvana. Bring it all together, bring all data in one place, manage it centrally, whatever. No, that's impossible because sometimes, we even have physically separated environments and we must maintain those various environments. But the way to do it is to bring together all those risk signals. The way to do it is to bring together the information that actually helps us manage those risks. And again, that's why at Qualys, we effectively coined up this new thing that we refer to as the Risk Operations Center. So unlike the Security Operations Center or SOC that, yes, you still have to have and you still need to use when things go bad, that's probably the quickest way of containing and remediating the problem. The Risk Operations Center should be on a front end of it. That should be that one layer, if you want, that translates all of those technologies and technical signals into what that means effectively for business at the top. So we are advocating for that translation layer, if you want. And if I had to explain to someone, how are they different and why you need both, think about it like this. Again, I'll use the car analogy. Your sock is almost like all the time looking at your rear view mirror. So you're observing things that already happened. You're trying to figure out whether someone managed to break in. You're trying to figure out how far they got. You're trying to figure out if they've left any breadcrumbs behind, so you can, contain that and remediate things. Whereas, unlike, looking in the rear view mirror, your rock is giving you that forward look, which is, those are the things that you need to change. Those are the things that you need to prioritize so that effectively any impact is minimized or it doesn't happen. It's almost like, someone breaks into your house, you're trying to figure out if and what they stole, rather than, rock in that case would be, well, actually, let's make sure that we lock the front door.
I heard of a new concept. It was my first time hearing about alert fatigue. I don't know if you heard about it. From my understanding, it means that cybersecurity experts and companies may have too much data to process. Is it true?
100%. From a perspective of an ex-practitioner, I can only tell you, how that looked like. I was a group CISO of a company that had more than 140,000 people, and I don't even know how many systems in different countries, in different environments. And imagine bringing all of that stuff together and trying to follow in one place what's happening across 60 countries in the world. Alert fatigue? Yes, absolutely yes. I think that's a reality. I think it's a very harsh reality. I remember reading some stats that although on one side we claim how, there is a talent shortage and how we don't have enough people to actually bring into cyber to help with the size of the problem, on the other, just on the back of burnout and on the back of, call it alert fatigue, call it overconsumption of overdose, absolutely, of all that data. People are actually, looking to get out of it very quickly as well, which is definitely not a good thing. So we need to be smarter about those things. I guess the big truth is, and that sort of goes back to what we discussed about boards and whatnot. We can't protect everything. We can't secure everything. But we need to make sure that we can bring effectively risk within the tolerance, within what the company is okay with. And to do that, certainly there's a big of a gap between, as I said, everything on one side and those things that definitely need doing on the other. So again, we need to become smarter at bringing those two together and making sure that people genuinely can focus on what matters. Hopefully that helps.
So this is my last question. Let's try to guess the future. For you, Ivan, what is the big next innovation in terms of cybersecurity?
Another great question. It actually might not be just this, but for the sake of our discussion, which was lovely so far, I'm going to try and contain myself. I see the next big thing, again, expanding on what I told you about our concept of a risk operations center. It's something that we already started doing, which is adding identity. But in this case, we need to go further, and it's not just adding the human identity, but adding agentic identity as well, being able to effectively observe and monitor the behavior across the board, understand what's going on, being able to properly understand all the business factors that we have to think about, being able to start from the simple, what are my assets and where my assets are. And I'm not just talking about, which IPs we have on the network. I'm talking about, in business terms, how something maps onto, your revenue, or how something maps onto your production floor when we talk about factories. So again, having the information about all possible threats and whatnot, being able to understand the identities, being able to understand non-human identities, that's not necessarily future. As I said, that's something that we are looking at right now, but that's something that businesses need to start, thinking about sooner rather than later, because of course you always do have a bit of time from maybe a new product coming up to actually how you implement all of that, how you can consume it, how you can productionize all of those things. At the end of the day, how do you properly end-to-end operationalize your risk management? And again, that's why we're trying to bring people together. That's why our big thing is our Rock On conference for EMEA that we do springtime. It's not only about our risk operations center, it's about effectively a very large community where people can come and discuss those things and figure out what are the best ways of them effectively managing their risks.
Well, thank you very much, Ivan. You brought a lot of insight to this show today, and I hope all the viewers will be as interested. Don't hesitate to like and comment, and you can find Ivan, obviously, on LinkedIn for more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Qualys is hosting our annual conference in London on 22nd of April. We bring together a community with a shared mission to treat cyber risk as a business imperative, not just a technical problem. This free event features leading voices covering the strategy, technology, and processes required to secure the modern enterprise. We will show you how to optimize and improve your continuous threat exposure management, how to leverage agentic AI, and how to create robust risk management practice. Quantitative approach through financial clarity transforms board risk reporting and CFO risk communication, thus helping you secure the right cyber insurance and prioritize risk remediation beyond simple patching.